I took a deep breath in and closed my eyes. I hated closing my eyes. If I closed my eyes and thought about it, I could see it all happening again. I could hear Maggie's screams again. Last year, I didn't take mine. I wanted to see what happens, what they're hiding. And I saw these things. They climb all over the houses, they go down people's chimneys, and they take people who aren't sleeping. You guys remember Maggie? That's how she died. I saw them take her. I heard her screams. It's all I can think about. I didn't realize it, but by the end of the story I was crying. A dam had broken somewhere inside me. I scrubbed my tears away with my sleeve. I could see Greg had stopped laughing, but I couldn't look at any of their faces, I was too embarrassed. I sounded nuts. All I could do was examine the bucket we'd flipped over to use as a table. It was old, from Rona, beat up. It was cracked. It was. They never found her body, Max said with a strained voice. I know Maggie's brother. Like, not well, but we talked. He said they were all sleeping. No one heard anything. They never found the body. They moved in the summer. What? How'd I miss that? I spent way more time than I should have staring at their house. I should have noticed. Yeah, like in August. He'd met me and said they were moving and that was it. We all sat there in shocked silence for a little bit until Ella piped up. So how do you know your parents drug you? She asked with a frown. Like those magic pills could be candy or something and it's just that placebo effect thing happening to you. I saw the prescription bottle. Besides, you feel weird the next day. Feel weird how? Fuzzy. We all turned to Greg, he'd largely been silent but now he looked nervous, passing the joint without taking a puff. We were all done actually, silently but unanimously voting to put it out. You wake up groggy. You know when you get woken up in the middle of the night? Like that, only it's morning. And you just sleep through the night. I've never woken up on Christmas Eve. Ever. The more I talked the more both he and Ella looked alarmed. Do your parents drug you too? No. Ella barked, almost sounding offended. No. No. I mean, I don't think so. Grandma makes us this tea though every Christmas Eve. It's supposed to calm us down. So we sleep, well. As she described it she scrunched her face up and tugged on her ponytail. Fuck. Fuck. They're drugging us too. Greg looked downright sick. He didn't say it, but from the look on his face, he'd been sleeping way too well on Christmas Eve too. I take Ambien so, they don't really need to, Max said with a shrug. By now Ella was pacing. Okay, so they're drugging us. But why? I mean, listen, I believe you saw what you saw, but couldn't it have been a hallucination? Why isn't this widespread news? You mean news like Maggie disappearing? I asked. I live right across the street and the cops didn't even show up. No one cared that Maggie died. No one talked about it. No wonder they moved. We all just pretended like she didn't exist. The shamed silence that followed stretched on until Greg's phone buzzed and he announced that he had to go to work. Ella did too, they both worked at the same fast food place. They gave us a half-hearted goodbye. I was exhausted, completely emotionally drained after spilling my guts, and Max offered to drive me home soon after the others left. It was a silent ride. He seemed deep in thought, and I was so tired I didn't even want to try and talk. It didn't matter. I'd told them. They could think I was crazy all they wanted. I found money on the counter for pizza at home, and put in a Domino's order before finding something to watch. The entire time I sat there all I could think about was Maggie, and how she'd just disappeared from our little town the moment she was snatched. It was like those things had just wiped her off the map and everyone let it happen. I remembered the obituary halfway through dinner and ran upstairs to dig out the notebook I'd put it in. It wasn't long, that's for sure. Her family had barely put in any description in at all. Like all obituaries, they had put down the date of her death, and that gave me a sudden idea. I started searching. Our town was small and rural, but we did have a newspaper, and it had managed to get a grant a few years ago to make a website and start digitizing everything. That meant that they had decades worth of obituaries to look through. I started to search for any deaths around Christmas. Deaths in December weren't unusual, even in a small town. Between icy roads causing grandma to fall or depression taking lives, death was expected at Christmas. But when I started to dig through my results, I noticed a serious difference between the Nana eats shit deaths and the ones that happened right on Christmas itself. They were all short, with few details, and all were published weeks after the event. There were never any funerals or memorial services to be had. No options to send flowers somewhere. It seemed like every year at least one person died under strange circumstances at Christmas and just became invisible. I made a list of the last few deaths and started searching for their families. Just like the Smiths, most of the families had moved away after the death. I scoured social media pages for more clues. No one that had left seemed to keep ties with anyone in our little town. In fact, many of the families hadn't been in the town long before the death had happened. If I thought about the Smiths, they had only moved here a few months before last Christmas. It wasn't uncommon for families to move here for the oil opportunities, make some money, and then leave when they realized there wasn't much to do. It wouldn't have looked unusual if you didn't know that someone had died. I sat back, shoveling in the last couple slices of cold pizza. Why hadn't I looked this up before? I'd spent most of 2022 trying to forget what I'd seen but being too scared to let it go. All I could think of was Christmas, and what I knew would happen when I was asleep. I'd nearly failed out of school. I'd lost my job, okay it was a shitty one, but still. I was this close to losing any opportunities for a good college. But worse than that, I was probably the only person who had seen what comes on Christmas Eve and lived to talk about it. That gave me a responsibility, right? I knew what they looked like, and what they did. And now, I knew that this had been going on for years. My parents had been drugging me since I was born, so they must have known about it. They grew up here. They had to know. The Smiths had only been in town for a few months. Maybe nobody warned them. Maybe they just went to bed like normal, never knowing the risks. Shit. Why had no one told them? I pulled out my phone, texting Max. I needed him to hook me up with Maggie's brother. I needed to know what happened after she died. Then I messaged everyone on Facebook in one big group chat. There were some families that had lived here for generations and had still had people die. I had the perfect idea on how to contact them. We were going trick-or-treating this year. Trying to talk to Maggie's brother had been a waste of time. I wasn't totally shocked, but I was disappointed. I'd thought he was actually going to talk to me at first. It had been going fine, even after mentioning how crazy it was that no one talked about his sister's death, when suddenly he stopped replying and blocked me. Blocked me on Insta, on Facebook, and when I tried calling his cell, I got that annoying number not in service robot voice. After that happened I filled my friends in on why we were going trick-or-treating. It wasn't exactly a popular request, but everyone seemed to agree to it out of pure loyalty. Normally, at 17, you went to a party and got drunk. Mostly because people didn't really love handing out candy to teenagers. This year we'd hit the streets. Someone's gonna call the cops on us. My dad will kill me if he finds out about this. Greg looked paranoid like usual. I couldn't blame him. His parents were super religious and thought costumes were, honestly I don't know. They just thought it was wrong. We'd had to keep a cape and plastic fangs for him at Max's house where we all got ready. We each opted for something quick and easy. Greg was a vampire, Ella was a witch, Max put on a cowboy hat and I dressed like a ghost. They weren't good costumes, but they were costumes. How'd you convince your parents to let you come out tonight anyways? He held up a plastic bag filled with religious pamphlets. I said I was called to spread the word. So what's the plan? We hit a few houses and try and get candy so we look legit, and then we go to the houses on my list. I answered, pulling out a list and a map where I'd marked everyone down. And you're just going to ask them about their murdered family member? What if there's kids? I plan on showing them this. I pulled out a piece of lined paper with a drawing of one of the creatures. They all stared at it. Don't spiders have like 8 legs? There's only 4. I rolled my eyes and put it back in my bag. I said spider why, they're not actual spiders. Okay Picasso. Ella laughed as we headed off into the night. We got turned away from a few houses, but people were surprisingly generous most of the time. We got a couple glad to see teenagers doing something wholesome comments, and it didn't take us long to get into it. It was nice. Trick or treating with my friends brought back a lot of memories and good feelings. Every time we stopped to compare notes on our haul it felt like we were kids again. It gave me just a glimmer of hope before we hit the first target house. We waited on the street for the big group of kids to get their candy and hustle on before stepping up to the plate and ringing the bell. Trick or treat. The door swung open and we all smiled like fools. The woman inside, a lady that looked to be in her 50s, gave us a confused smile back and grabbed her candy bowl. I held up my art the moment the peanut butter cups hit the pillowcase. Do you recognize this? I asked. She paused, looked over my shitty drawing and then shook her head. No I don't. But it's very nice. You kids have a good Halloween. I didn't even have time to react, the next group of kids were already pushing us out, and so we walked back to the street. Okay that didn't work, I sighed, opening up a snack-sized bag of chips. Do we believe her? Ella asked, doing the same. We all started walking and eating, the salt cutting the handfuls of candy we'd already stuffed ourselves with. Yeah. I don't think she's seen them. She didn't even blink. So maybe you gotta go harder next time. If no one's seen those things it won't mean a thing to them. Ask them about the deaths. So I did. The next house was polite as could be considering the question. The house after slammed the door in our faces. The house after that actually took their candy back before rattling the door on its hinges. It was going honestly pretty terrible. No pumpkins. Porch light is off. Bummer. It was getting late, and we'd agreed to go to Max's house for curfew to watch movies. I'd only marked off a plan for 10 houses, and we'd reached our limit. The last house was a dead end. Anyone have a pen? I asked suddenly, a last-ditch idea coming to mind. Greg dug through his pamphlet bag and gave me one, and I crouched on the sidewalk to write a quick note on the back of the drawing. I left my phone number and an explanation and slipped it through the rusty old mail slot on the door. It was old, loud, and nearly bit my fingers off trying to get the paper through. Once I saw it disappear we started to leave. We got nearly a house away before a hoarse yell stopped us. Looking back, a woman that had to be at least in her 80s was waving at us from the place we'd just been. Get over here, she squawked, the paper clutched in her hand. We all froze, sharing nervous glances. I guess some part of me didn't really believe anyone would recognize it. If no one recognized it, then the issue would be moot. I could say I'd done what I could and just start therapy to deal with what I saw. Instead, we all made our way back, meeting the woman on her stoop. "Get inside, it's cold out," she ordered, stepping aside and motioning us through. "Shoes off. Sit down." What looked like no lights on from the outside was actually the thickest blackout curtains I'd ever seen. Every window we could see was completely covered, and barred. When she shut the door, she locked it and braced it with a chair. Not that I think it really mattered, the thing looked like an industrial security door from the inside. What really stood out to me though, and what I couldn't stop staring at, was her fireplace. It just didn't really exist anymore. She'd filled the bottom with cement, gated it, and wrapped the gate with barbed wire. "So, you've been awake on Christmas Eve, it seems. Must have been quite the fright." "When?" I was in shock. She sat comfortably on a recliner just across from us, a shotgun stuffed in what looked like a magazine holder. "Well, last year," I stuttered out. She just nodded, looking over the drawing carefully. I had to know why. "They give us pills." "Pills? Goodness. That's ripe for trouble. Back in my day you got an infusion. Or Dad let you sneak some alcohol. Anything to hide it. I guess your parents bought into that never lie to your kids crap." The magazine started shilling. She clucked her tongue, tucking the piece of paper into her pocket. "Look where it got them. Do they know?" I shook my head quickly. "I didn't think they knew." "Humph. Well, you're lucky. There's not a lot of lucky ones that see the creatures and live to talk about it. Most anyone who does gets their death." "Up the chimney," I practically whispered, and her face softened. "Poor kid. You must live near that girl that died. There was just one last year, I believe." "I'm sorry, dear, that's just something no one should ever see." Beside me, Greg, Max, and Ella had all sunken into themselves. Ella looked like she might throw up at any second. "So it's real?" she asked, pulling off her fake nose. "They're real." The woman gave a solemn nod. She gave us a thin-lipped smile before getting up, returning moments later with a box of papers. "You probably already know this, but my name is Rosalie Walsh. Rosie for short. My family's lived here for generations now. My sister, God rest her soul, was the most recent member of my family to die in that awful way. She'd been on a new medication. Didn't realize it was basically amphetamines. By time she realized she wasn't getting to sleep, there just wasn't anything she could do about it. Told me as much in the letter she left. There's an empty grave in her name at the cemetery. There's a lot of empty graves. Empty urns. Lots of families in this town never get to bury their loved ones." She dug through the box and pulled out an album of family photos. There were several photos with red dots next to them, and I realized that they were people that had been taken. "So you never find the bodies?" "No. And having seen it happen myself, I guess it's as much a blessing as a curse." "Where do the bodies go?" asked Max, twisting and turning the book, flipping pages and frowning at the growing list of red dots. "Don't know. Lots of rumor and conjecture on that one. Some folks say they're eaten. Bathrooms down the hall and to the left, kid dash." She pointed at Greg, who was green by then, and he gratefully ran off through the house. "Like I said. Some folks think they get eaten. Other folks think they're taken somewhere. Some of the more airy-fairy fools think that they're taken to some sort of fantasy land. The real Santa's workshop. That they're all up there living in bliss. I think if they'd seen what a person looks like after going up a chimney, there wouldn't be any magical thinking left." "So what are they?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Look through here," she ordered, passing me the box and kicking the recline function into gear. "I'm no expert. Not a history major or archaeology anything. I went to school for accounting. But I was your age when I took an interest in it. Woke up at just the wrong time. Guess my father didn't put enough whiskey in my drink that night. Instead of waking up Christmas morning, I woke up close to midnight. Heard the hooves. Could have sworn I heard the bells. The sound of the ornaments clinking on the tree. Doesn't matter how old you are, if you think you hear Santa on Christmas Eve, you get up to look. So I did. Crept out real slow, real quiet. I got just to the edge of the living room when I saw them, those nasty things. Disgusting creatures. They had my little brother, and she paused, taking in a sharp breath and resting her fingers on her face, a little shake to her voice. God, 60 years and it still gets me. They put him up the chimney. A couple go up the top, hold on to the head. The other shoves from the bottom. He was awake. He screamed, Lord, he screamed. Finally she just waved her hand a little, as if trying to wave away the memory, her eyes wet. Couldn't do nothing. I was too scared. I went back to bed. Hid under the covers. But it was fine. Once they get awaker, they leave. They got what they came for. I didn't sleep for years. Still don't, not really. While she talked, Ella and I rifled through the box. There were dates, times. Letters written from strangers describing what they'd seen. There were drawings too, much better than mine but all displaying something similar. The collection went back through the years.